So just join online. Good afternoon and welcome to the session of the webinar. I'd like to wish you all a very warm welcome. This is part of the Heritage Week series in honor of Heritage Month. Before we begin, just a few house rules. Could you please ensure that your mic is turned off as well as your camera? That will be useful, thank you. Our sign language interpreters will be available throughout the session on YouTube. If you need those services, please switch from Teams to YouTube for that. My name is Nancy Kluter. I work in the National Inventory Unit. I'm a content moderator. In terms of Section 39 of the National Heritage Resources Act, number 25 of 1999, SAHRA is required to compile and maintain a national inventory of the national estate, It's defined as heritage resources of cultural and other significances. This inventory must be in the form of a database, and it must contain all heritage resources subject to formal and general protection. The National Inventory Unit has some very interesting subjects lined up, and I'm sure you will enjoy them all. But before we begin, we have our CEO of SAHRA, Advocate Lungiswa Malgas, who would like to welcome you all.
Good day, my name is Lungisa Malgas. I'm the CEO of the South African Heritage Resources Agency. Thank you all for joining us today as we celebrate the unique and diverse heritage of the country we call home. We are honored and humbled to have you as our guests. We are further honored to take this opportunity to share and celebrate the many areas of our cultural heritage resources with our community as we celebrate Heritage Month 2022. We are extremely diverse society with many layers in our heritage landscape, and we acknowledge that the greatest part about our heritage is this diversity. We are a nation of 11 official languages that also celebrates other languages commonly used by our international friends and visitors. We are also a nation that celebrates the indigenous languages of the First Nations that originated in our beautiful land. We come from a painful past which will forever be tainted by the legacy of apartheid and colonialism, which is why our heritage is so extremely important to us. Our heritage is a source of identity and cohesion for our nation. It makes us who we are. It shapes and molds us and gives us a sense of belonging. It is a story for all our children to share irrespective of their differences. It is passed down from generation to generation, linking the present to the past. Our heritage finds expression in our rituals, food, music, art, and our significant sites and objects. This is what makes South Africa a magnificent space. We are home to the most beautiful sites, objects, dating back prehistorical times, which opens a window into lives of the earliest ancestors of our humankind. Our indigenous knowledge systems, which have been preserved by our elders and traditional healers, are also a vital part of our heritage. This year's Heritage Month webinar series is taking place in the shadow of COVID-19, which has taken massive toll on human life, on our communities, and on our economy. As the world recovers from the battle against COVID-19, we are encouraged by the united global effort to beat the virus. It shows that through collaboration and cooperation, we can achieve and overcome anything on this planet, which is why we are taking this year's Heritage Month webinar as an opportunity for us to collaborate and build a global network of partners that will assist us in developing a world-class heritage sector in South Africa. I thank you.
Please ask again that all mics are muted and cameras turned off. Thank you. The first presentation from our unit today will be Heritage Inventories and the Data-Driven Decision Making. This will be presented by the Manager of the National Inventory Unit, Mr. Clinton Jackson. Thank you, Clinton.
Thank you very much. Fantastic. Thank you very much to everyone for joining us here today. So my name is Clinton Jackson. I'm the manager of the National Inventory Unit, and I've just got a short presentation for you on heritage inventories and the utilization of that data to drive decision-making in the heritage sector. So firstly, just a bit of background. The National Inventory Unit of SAHRA is responsible for the compilation and maintenance of the inventory of the national estate. This is a database of places and objects which are subject to both the formal as well as the general protections under the National Heritage Resources Act. And coupled with that, we're also responsible for the development of policy and standards. One of the key features of our legislation is that this inventory of the national estate must be publicly accessible, with a few caveats where vulnerable resources may be withheld from public consumption. But by and large, the public has the right to access the inventory of heritage resources in this country. So, firstly, what are heritage inventories? So, quite simply, inventories are ongoing records for identifying as well as describing heritage places for a range of purposes, including heritage management and protection. And for those of you that are interested, there's a fantastic paper which was written by David Myers having a look at heritage inventories as a tool for sustainable heritage management, and I would highly recommend. So our heritage legislation recognizes the importance of inventories and requires that all authorities contribute to a consolidated inventory of heritage resources, which is kept by SAHRA as the central repository. This is intended to follow in line with the three-tier system of government and establishes a flow on how data on heritage resources is intended to reach SAHRA for its consolidation. So you've got your local authorities or municipalities who are required to undertake inventorization exercises and communicate with communities to identify resources, which are then sent up to our provincial authorities for inclusion in formal mechanisms like your heritage register, which is then fed up to SAHRA for final consolidation across the country, as well as public dissemination. And then you've got your government departments and museums and universities who also play a role in supplying information to SAHRA on heritage resources in their control. The problem, though, that we encounter is that this three-tier system of heritage management is not fully functional. Out of the 9 provinces, only 2 provincial authorities are deemed fully competent to fulfill all of its functions mandated under the NARA, and one of which, and another heritage authority, their competency has lapsed and needs to be reassessed. And then within the municipal sector, only 1 municipality has received delegated authority for heritage management at this stage, that being the City of Cape Town. Because of the under-resourced nature of heritage authorities, inventories are generally treated as secondary in most cases, if they're actually considered at all. So as SAHRA, we've had to go out and seek other sources of data as a means of supplementing and trying to still provide information through the inventory and cover for that lack of a working flow. Now, us undertaking these additional procedures has worked quite well. As we can see from 2012, when our online system SAHRIS went live, through to the end of last year in 2021, the amount of information that we've got on heritage sites and the number that have been recorded has increased quite dramatically. But the thing is with heritage inventories, they're only as good as how they are being utilized, which brings us to using data within the inventory to drive decision making. So firstly, we shouldn't be thinking of heritage inventories as just lists of identified heritage resources, but rather we should be framing them as important sources of data that can be used to further heritage management. In line with this, each year, SAHRA releases a document known as the Summary and Analysis of the National Estate, which essentially breaks down heritage and what we have in our inventory into numbers. And through this publication, we've used this as a platform to discuss ways that data within the inventory can be used to address certain issues within heritage management. And through this, we are arguing that a renewed focus on documentation and the utilization of data being collected through this process can provide a means to facilitate targeted decision-making and prioritization of the limited resources that are available to us to alleviate some of those constraints brought about by the non-functioning of this three-tier system. And really what that amounts to is using data in the inventory to be proactive about management. So as an example of this, in 2018, we began using data within the inventory in combination with other data sets supplied to us by the South African National Space Agency, Council for Geoscience, and the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research to begin identifying sites at risk from a number of factors, such as seismic risk, fault fires, flooding, etc. And the aim of this was to identify potential risks before they happen so that the limited resources available within the heritage management sector can be directed towards those heritage resources which are most at risk. And this was great because it did identify resources across the country where focus should be placed. But one of the problems that we encountered with this is at least we have a list of resources that are at risk, but as an authority, we still don't get notified when things actually go wrong, such as in the case of a large fire in the Drakensberg area in 2020, where SAHRA, we weren't actually notified about it. So we ended up looking at it as a post-event situation. But to address this situation, we took it a step further, and have undertaken a process of integrating the data within the inventory with other sources of information to provide more rapid notifications. So NASA offers a fantastic service called the Fire Information for Resource Management System, which is a satellite monitoring network that covers the globe every 12 hours and identifies potential fire activity. And when something is identified within one of the regions that we've loaded from our inventory, a notification is sent to us. And in that way, we're able to be kept informed about possible fires and disasters within certain areas, and be able to send this information to site managers or other custodians so that they're able to follow up on this information if they're not already aware that there's a possible occurrence near the site in question. A fantastic example quite recently was within the Cradle of Humankind. We received a notification of a fire event, and the manager of our archaeology unit sent that to one of the property owners within the Cradle, who was then able to inform us that, yes, that something had occurred, but had subsequently been addressed and there was no risk. Sorry, just a moment. So we're getting notifications of no sound.
Mm-hmm. Someone muted us by sign.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. And then following from that, we've also been looking at ways on how to improve our site level documentation to provide better data for the monitoring of heritage resources. So the example that we've got here is a recent aerial drone survey that was undertaken of the Noordkapperpunt Stonewall fish traps in Still Bay and National Heritage Site. So we've been able to create an exceptionally high resolution image of the heritage site itself, which provides a fantastic baseline for ongoing monitoring that can be coupled with other sources of information, such as satellite imagery or other aerial photography that is readily available, allowing our heritage managers to be able to remotely monitor a site and be able to address issues when they are identified. Within the vein of screening and impact assessment, a process has been undertaken to integrate the inventory of the national estate and the data we have with the National Environmental Screening Tool supplied by the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, which is a great way of, at the first stages of development across the country, identifying potential impact to heritage resources. And our archaeology, paleontology and meteorites unit is currently working with them to develop protocols around that. But then we must also consider how useful it is to understand the areas where we don't have information, where you're able to use sort of negative mapping to identify areas where there's a paucity of information and which will require more intensive consideration during or prior to development. So it helps with that decision-making ability. And then we've been taking it a step further by using known resources to identify correlation factors to start looking at the idea of sensitivity analysis. So the image on the right-hand side there is a very, very, very early draft of a maritime and shipwreck sensitivity map that we started looking at developing by using the locations of known shipwrecks within our territorial waters and looking at factors that correlate and potentially generating a sensitivity model in order to assist with proactive management and identifying potential areas of impact. And then an interesting use of the data within the inventory of the national estate is its utility for furthering public discourse. So last year, a large project was undertaken, which was also presented in last year's webinar series, for a national audit of monuments and memorials. There's been a lot of public discourse around representation and how monuments, memorials, and particularly statues impact on the heritage landscape. But without an appropriate baseline for data, it's very difficult to engage with that conversation holistically and provide decision-making baselines. So after that project, we've been able to generate quite a large base of data in order to further that public discourse. And even outside the idea of using quite technical or fancy data analysis, even looking at data within the inventory quite simplistically is able to give quite a good snapshot of how heritage is being represented through some of the formal mechanisms. If we look at the sites across the country that have been formally declared and formally protected, since the NARA came into effect in 2000, you can see that 3 provinces in the country actually haven't undertaken a process of declaring new heritage resources. And as declaration is a very important means of recognizing significance, one has to question how heritage is being represented if these sites aren't being declared and their significance actually elevated through that mechanism. So this utilizing the inventory is a very important means of being able to take stock of heritage and direct how and being able to have a look and see what areas need to be addressed. But here's some of the challenges that we've been encountering when looking at data as a decision-making tool. So firstly, there are quite clear biases within the inventory of the national estate. As a lot of our data comes from mechanisms like impact assessments, it tends to be very archaeological heavy. And also because we're not getting an effective flow of data from places like your heritage authorities, there is quite an imbalance in terms of the geographic spread of our information and the types of heritage resources that actually come to the inventory. Something that we've also noticed over time is the trap of pilot projects. Where authorities or other institutions are able to undertake inventory exercises, they tend to happen in once-off measures. So a survey will occur, some information is generated, but it's always treated as a pilot, and inventories need to be constantly maintained, updated, and improved upon. And then, of course, data sharing and updates. Where information is available, as SAHRA, we don't always get that information sent to us. And this is something that can assist in covering that gap left by some of the authorities that are not necessarily able to undertake these processes for us. And then, of course, when we do get information, when that changes, a process of updating that to ensure that as SAHRA, we have the most updated information available. And then finally, paralysis. What we've tended to find is that a lot of the authorities, because of the very nature of their under-resourcedness, they tend to be focused on doing what they can without taking that step further and dealing with things like your heritage inventories, which can serve as a tool to address a lot of those limitations that they have from their limited resources. But really, what are we trying to get at with this? So what I'm trying to say here is we should be ensuring that there is a focus on documentation, and that takes the center role in heritage management. And then turning inventories and that documentation and information you have into useful tools that can be used to gain insights and then finally turned into actions to direct the management of heritage in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Clinton. I believe SAHRIS as a tool will go a long way in the continued protection of our national estate, and we encourage museums to continue making use of SAHRIS, and those that haven't, please contact us. We will help you and assist you in any way we can so that you can make use of this free and available tool for your inventories. The next presentation is called SAHRIS 10 Years On. And this will be presented by Mr. Nicholas Wiltshire from Cedar Tower Services. Nick is no stranger to SAHRA. He used to be a colleague of ours, and we'd like to think of him as the parent, the father of SAHRIS, as he started with the project from the start. So let's hand over to Nick and hear all about it.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to share my screen.
Let's give that a go. Okay, let's do it like this. Right, and then I'll go into slideshow and go to the beginning. Good. Can everyone hear me and can everyone see my screen?
Yes, you are loud and clear.
Okay, fantastic. All right, thank you for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. And thank you to the National Inventory Unit team and to Clinton, for the wonderful talk that he's just given. I think that contextualizes a little bit of the background to SAHRIS, and I'd like to sort of touch on some of these points as we reflect on the development of SAHRIS from 2011, 2012, with the first release. Towards the new version, which is coming out, and it's already gone out for testing, and many of you logged on and gave very, very useful feedback. So we are busy working through that at the moment to see what adjustments we need to make to the system based on the feedback that we've received from those people who've carried out some of the testing. So in 2012, we launched the first version of SAHRIS. About midway through that year, so the development period took about 6 months, which, it was just me working at SAHRA, which is a good thing, I think, in that it was a small team. It didn't require hordes of developers. It did come in the back of some unsuccessful attempts to develop SAHRIS that had happened earlier, where there were attempts to develop it using proprietary software. There were attempts to develop it using open source software, but to write the whole system from scratch didn't really succeed. And we then used Drupal, at the time it was Drupal version 7, to build it. And it was a bit more like using Lego, if you like, to build the system rather than writing all the code from scratch. So that's why it took a relatively short time to put the system together according to the processes that were in use. We hosted the system at what was then MWeb. I think they've been bought out by Ignite. I think they're now called Ignite or something like that. But we had 2 dedicated servers at the Cape Town data center and another dedicated server. I think it was 2 dedicated servers in Johannesburg. And we used to replicate the data between those 2 servers for redundancy and backups and so on. So if there was any issue hitting Cape Town, we could then revert to Joburg and vice versa. And there are subsequent hosting solutions. I'll hopefully touch on that a little bit towards the end of the talk about where we can now go, 10 years on with the different types of hosting, which is much more efficient. The system was developed on the back of a very thorough report. David Hart, I think he might be on the call, contributed to it, and Roger Layton. There were many, many other people, and it went extensively out to various experts in the field about what SAHRA should do. And so we used that report to guide the development of SAHRIS. And there were a range of tools that were in use that also shaped how SAHRIS was built. So we had, active projects that had gone through, such as the mapping project under Mary Leslie and Stephen Walker, and that helped guide us about the GIS, for instance. There was a collections management pilot for SAHRA's objects. We also used that to guide us, and various other tools that people use to record sites. So after that, we focused on the heritage management of sites and cases as the first, if you like, modules of the new system, given that there was a large case management and permit application process needing digitization and automation. We pushed the collections management side of SAHRIS, which wasn't really a core focus, I think, or intention of the development of SAHRIS in the scoping document, although that was the pilot project in the access system that was developed then. But we put that part of SAHRIS last. So we first focused on putting the case management process and the permit applications up front. And that went live in 2012, midway through 2012, and has been running ever since. It was also a challenge to think through the licensing of the data. So we also had the fortune of having the CC by SA licensing model, which had been successfully run on Wikipedia for many years by the time SAHRIS was developed, to use as a guide. And we had quite a lot of consultation with the CC by SA team that was based, some of them were based here in Cape Town, and we got a lot of good advice about licensing the data. So essentially, when users upload content to SAHRIS, they have to be referenced and cited when other users use their information, but it's a share and share alike system. So you put in and you can take out, and it's a very free-flowing licensing model rather than uploading everything there with strict copyright in place, which hasn't worked on many other systems that we've used. So the data then, once the development of SAHRIS was completed, we then moved very quickly into the upload of data. So we felt that to gain enough momentum and to get buy-in from the user base, which included the public who submit all the applications, not only to SAHRA, which is quite limited. There are only a few national heritage sites. The bulk of the heritage management of sites occurs at provincial and local level. So to get the provincial heritage authorities on board, we needed to upload as much information as possible of their existing databases. So one of those was the report mapping project, which gave us, I think at the time, about 12,000 or 13,000 digitized PDF reports, which we uploaded with their associated GIS mapping information. So it could show you the area where that project took place. Not always the area that was walked or surveyed, but it was at least the farm level indicator of where that project took place. Whether it was a mine or a housing development and so on, we had that information. We also uploaded the Maritime Unit Shipwreck database, and that I think was about 2,000 or 3,000 shipwrecks of various maritime resources. There was the declared national and provincial heritage site register. So that was about 3,500 sites that were declared mainly during the days of the National Monuments Council under the National Monuments Act. And that ran up to 1999. And then there were a few sites at that time that had been declared as national or provincial heritage sites after the NHRA was promulgated. All the old national monuments were automatically proclaimed, if you like, as provincial heritage sites. And I think only a handful have been deproclaimed, if any. I think there are certainly some sites that were quite clear examples where it could be lowered to a local level, a significance level. The Martha Provincial Heritage Authority were great. They were very forthcoming about joining SAHRIS. They were the first PRA to go live on SAHRIS later in 2012. And so after a lot of training, they went live, I think, in 2013, early 2013. And we imported all of their heritage register buildings. It's mainly buildings. There are a couple of other types of sites, but they've got quite extensive databases that have been well maintained around their heritage register. And then the KZN Museum also submitted all of their archaeological sites, and there were about 5,000 or 6,000 sites within that data set. And then the ECT archaeological sites database also had 5,500 sites. So all of these databases were migrated into SAHRIS. And of course, the fields, the terminology, the way that the structure of the data had to be worked on in order to make it compatible with SAHRIS. So SAHRIS had to be compatible with those data sets and vice versa in the data transformation. So it was quite a technical process to try and find the happy medium between those two. And I'll get to a very important point, which is in the new version about that. One of the other interesting things we did at the time was to install a geo server. That's an open source mapping server. And on that, we've loaded the 1 in 250,000, 1 in 50,000 topographic color maps of South Africa, which are tiled, so that they load quite quickly on your device. We loaded all the shape files of farm boundaries. We loaded up, various other layers, such as the paleosensitivity map, which was developed with the CGS, the Council for Geoscience, using their 1 in 250,000, I think. Maybe it was a 1 in 50,000 geological map as the base layer. And then we color-coded that using the fossil sensitivity reports that people like John Armand and Gideon Groenewald had developed for SAHRA. So this information that they had written up in the reports was then coded into that layer and then released as a paleosensitivity map. And I think that was a world first at the time. So besides the GeoServer, there are also site data keys, which are replicated to PostGIS. So it sits on a PostgreSQL database server. And every time you upload a site or edit a site or remove a site on SAHRIS, those records are kept in sync, and people who are using the advanced GIS aspects of SAHRIS are able to see that data set in full. So that's targets the heritage managers in particular. And it's part of the data set which Clinton alluded to in that screening tool. So those sensitivity layers are generated based on that background data and the gradings assigned to each of those sites and points in space. There were also collections which were digitized at the time of the early version of SAHRIS. And Comi will remember these. The National Museum in Bloemfontein's archaeology and anthropology collections were digitized and uploaded to SAHRIS, and the National Afrikaans Literary Museum at the time. And after that, with Clinton and his team, they've uploaded a number of other collections of objects to SAHRIS using the collection management features of SAHRIS. However, most people, and probably most people on this meeting, know SAHRIS more from the case management and permit application processes, which are by far the bulk of the users that are using SAHRIS at the moment for, obtaining a Section 38 development process, ROD, or a permit for, an affected national heritage site. and certainly in KZN, all of their section 37 instead of 34 in the NHRA, those are all handled on SAHRIS as well as their development applications. So the overview of all the processes is, say, permits, development applications, the nomination and declaration of sites and objects. So Regina Isaac's unit, is the heritage objects unit, and they handle all of their processes on SAHRIS. And then the grading, surveys, and inventories of sites. There are thousands, if over nearly 60,000 sites that Clinton mentioned that are all on SAHRIS. So at this stage, I know that Heritage Western Cape is looking to join SAHRIS, which we're very keen on, of course. And they would be then the second very, very big PRA, that is very, very capacitated and has a lot of staff and a lot of data to go onto SAHRIS. That would be a great success with the new version. But as I say, in version 1, we didn't have Heritage Western Cape on board. We only had a MARFA. And then we had the other provinces that the APM unit at SAHRA runs the the bulk of the Section 38 process on, as well as the built environment units within the provinces that had capacity and had their competence assessed and granted. Those PRAs were all trained on SAHRIS. I think we ran over 40 workshops at the time, to various degrees of success, as Clinton mentioned in his graph about the level of uptake of SAHRIS. The system went out to the country. What we also did, and I don't think a lot of people know, is we scanned the entire registry of SAHRA. So all the old National Monuments Council files, and then SAHRA's files that hadn't entered the digital format in 2012. All of those files were scanned into PDF form, and there's a large archive of unextracted, if you like, information, which is an ongoing project that the National Inventory Unit is running to extract that information. So the actual boundaries and the title deeds and survey general diagrams, for instance, of some of those very old declarations, they are busy working through all of that information. As I mentioned, more object collections have been digitized since then. We also developed the ODK, Open Data Kit app, for site recording, and that allowed offline site recording in the field. That has been extensively used by a certain team to go out and record sites. Clinton mentioned the COBO form, which was used, I think, the year before last for the Monuments and Memorials project, which is a sister application of ODK, but it works on iOS as well as Android. And those two applications, which work on mobile phones, are compatible with SAHRIS and with the new version. So those will be used extensively. And over 350,000 records now lie on SAHRIS. So the South African heritage system is the only fully successful system in Africa. So it's the only country in Africa that has a fully functioning heritage management system, which links the development process for impacts on sites to the management of sites and inventorization process of those sites. As I say, we managed to extract, so Jenna will talk about that in a little bit, about the extraction process. We added 17,000 sites after 2014, 15, 16 to SAHRIS from the various impact assessment reports, and there are many more sites to be added. And then other researchers have continued, such as Vicky Nardell and the eCRAG group, who use SAHRIS as their primary upload tool for site recording when they're in the field. So Clinton showed you that map. So there it is again. So it just shows you how many sites are currently on SAHRIS, and there are literally millions of sites to be added. But we've really got a good stab at that, at this stage. And it's just a screenshot of the ODK recording process and the app. And then the COBO forms, which I think will be the de facto or default application we're moving towards for mobile phone recording that will be linked to SAHRIS. Some of the applications, this is the Cape Winelands project, where this was run by private consultants, heritage consultants. Fabio Toruschini, before he passed away a few years ago, was the lead on this very large inventory and grading process for heritage resources across the whole Cape Winelands municipality. And a very novel methodology was invented for this process using the SAHRIS data. So it won the Landscape Award, and Bruce Eitzen is, I think, on the call, so he's also used this, and many people use this tool. And it's an offline extract, if you like, an interactive extract of data which is on SAHRIS, or certain of the data is on SAHRIS. And this is a great example of how the data is used and utilized in a real world context for actual management of sites. So some of the weaknesses, and I think this is, so we've got the highlights of what we managed to achieve, but some of the weaknesses of SAHRIS are related to time. What was the technology at the time, or what were the assumptions we made, which took us down a path, which in hindsight, we could do differently. So looking at the theme, for instance, isn't mobile friendly. The current version of SAHRIS doesn't have a mobile friendly theme. And the reason for that was the website of SAHRA at the time had been designed, the new website, with a particular theme in mind. And we chose a theme which matched that. So it's as simple as that. We tried to fit the themes that were available at the time to fit the theme that we wanted to have released as the new website for SAHRA at the time. There was also not as much emphasis on mobile-friendly applications at the time, but since then it went very, very quickly. And as one of the things I think definitely regretted, if you like, having gone down a non-mobile friendly theme in the first version of SAHRIS. The new version of SAHRIS, of course, has a very mobile friendly theme and is mobile friendly first going forward, and is a lot less intensive in terms of the graphics and the use of non-compliant design for mobile devices. The second thing, which is a big job that Clinton and his team carried out, was to map the fields used on SAHRIS against Dublin Core and amongst others, and to create that documentation which can set out what data is on SAHRIS and what data sits out in the core data coding standards, and where there are overlaps and where the same field is described as a certain field name in SAHRIS and where that belongs in the data coding standards, and where there are additional fields that are just specific to the SAHRIS implementation that don't need to necessarily reflect a minimum data set on the core data standards. So that was a big job, and that has been part of this version that's coming out, is that it's a fully mapped system that we have it represented in the data coding standards. The new theme is easier to navigate because we have the actions and menu bars fixed along the side. So it's more of an application than an old website style, if you like, where the drop-down menus on the current version of SAHRIS, if you're using a mobile phone, are quite difficult to use. So the new one uses this fixed side panel, so it works more like an application and a more modern website application system. The workflow has definitely changed in the new system. So all of the pros are getting their own look and feel, if you like, on their forms and the terminology that they use for their forms. So you will see references to Form A or Form H or whatever on Martha's forms. They've got their own way of writing out their fields and the data that they would like from their applicants. So the terminology that they use will be the same terminology on their forms. And the technology that has made this possible for us is the use of something called web forms, where we were able to provide a much more flexible application system, which sits as a shell, if you like, on the outside, so that the look and feel and the terms used by each of the pros can still remain relatively case specific, or not case specific, but PRA specific, with the minimum data set feeding back into a core data set that is part of the heritage case content type on SAHRIS. So both of those sit side by side nicely in the new system, and it's a lot faster. So I think many people will find the new application system a lot faster to use than the current one. There's less going through different pages of a wizard. It's a little bit more intuitive. We've tried to automate the linking of heritage reports. So if you choose to do that at the case application stage or not, you could decide that, and then it will change the fields available to you accordingly. There's a lot of use of skip logic. So based on your choices earlier on in the form, a lot of things disappear or appear depending on which choices you've made. And we've tried to keep these as simple as possible, and that you don't have to learn all sorts of different forms and so on. So we've integrated many of the forms, but using the same technology for the different PRAs. So I think that we'll hopefully get a lot more buy-in from the PRAs, that they can feel that their forms and their style of stating their terminology will be represented. With the first version of SAHRIS, unfortunately, we had to straitjacket everyone into the same case management system, if you like. So we were trying to account for every single possible scenario or variable, but there was just obviously a limit to that. So we had to train users at the different PRAs to use a field that might not be named the same way as their field. So that is no longer on the new version. The auto routing, I think, is a great addition that we've also added to the new system. So when you carrying out the site recording process, you don't have to know to then click onto the different subsequent parts of a site recording process. So the first choices you made, depending on the site type that you've chosen, will then automatically link you to the next set of fields that you need to fill in, whether it be an archaeological site or a shipwreck or a building or a cultural landscape or whatever it is. Then there are more types that we've baked into the new system, a range of types of sites, and the appropriate fields which belong to each of those. So there's a sort of background wizard which will take you automatically through those steps based on your earlier choices. The mapping potential of SAHRIS, that is a major sense of improvement with the new version. So we are able to export not only point data, but we can push the lines and polygons that belong to the definitions of sites or to the developments automatically through to PostGIS. And we can then fix some of the challenges that the NIU team had in updating that information out in SAHRIS. So that will all be automated and done automatically in the new version. And with all of these things, the nice thing with the version 2 is it's a lot more streamlined and runs a lot faster than version 1. There's a lot less bloat. And as I say, some of that has to do with the architecture, the technology behind the new version of Drupal. It's Drupal 9, but also with the hosting solutions that are now available that we didn't have at the time. So I mentioned Kobo Forms and that we'd like our Apple iOS users to have full access to the mobile apps, which we only had for Android in the first version of SAHRIS. So that is an important improvement that we've made. The hosting environment, we're definitely moving away from the NAS servers, which were purchased back in 2012. They went down a number of times over the years, as hard drives fail and have to be replaced in the RAID array. So all of that will go off to a cloud environment in South Africa. So Amazon has the AWS cloud hosting in South Africa now. So at this stage, we're looking to host with AWS in South Africa. If the feature can be moved anywhere to other cloud hosting providers, but they're of the best out there. And that will provide a lot of redundancy and high speed access to the various components of SAHRIS. And also when you are downloading images, for instance, you will be downloading them from the S3 system, which means each image has got its own dedicated internet pipe, if you like, to that image. You're not slowing down the server while downloading a batch of images, or using the database or the web server and so on. So it's a very optimized and efficient way of serving up the type of data that a content management system like Drupal uses. So we've also got other additional features. So the auto case assignment has been a big requirement for the case officers. The delegation of rights to authors to allow other users to work on their cases. So at the moment, some of you use SAHRIS all the time, know that once you're the author of a case, there's a little bit of a process involved in allowing another person to edit that case. There are improved notifications and partitioning of user permissions, bulk download of files in a single click, which is a nice add-on which we've developed in the new version. And then the media file management is much more advanced in the new version about adding metadata and types of files. That is an expansion of what you can currently do on SAHRIS. Okay, and I think that covers all the main things that we tried to do in version 2. And I think I've gone a little over time. I'm sorry about that, but have you guys got any questions?
Gosh, thank you, Nick. I think one forgets just how many years and how much effort went into the development of SAHRIS. And one thing we know, there was plenty of passion then and now. And certainly from the manager of the National Inventory side, plenty of passion as well. So once again, thank you for your time. Our next presenter is Gertie Therion. Gertie joined the NIU just at the 1st of this month, and she's going to speak about, she came in as an inventories controller and will be presenting on QR coding for the museums and the heritage sector. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Sorry, I'm having technical issues. Is it good? Can anybody see my screen? Yes. Thanks. I'm sorry about that. So, as stated, my name is Gertie Therion, and I am an inventories controller here at SAHRA with the inventory unit. Now, my talk today is going to be on QR coding and its use for the museum and the heritage sector. Now, firstly, what is a QR code? Most people have seen a QR code somewhere, usually in magazines, but the last few years, it's actually being used a lot on easy payment accesses. Now, a QR code is just a two-dimensional form of a linear barcode, which is that normal line barcode you see behind every product you buy. It's a matrix type of barcode, which only means that it's created not through lines, but through white and black blocks on the unit. Now, QR itself stands for quick response, and it acts as an access point to data. That's its main function. The QR code can be used as a link to online data, or it can be used as a storage space itself for offline data. Now, one of the main functions of QR code, which is an improvement on the linear barcode, is that a QR code can actually still be read even if 30% of the QR itself is damaged. It has in its design setup functions that correct for this type of error, which a linear barcode does not. Now, another thing is that a QR code is almost completely free. It can be generated from online programs or offline programs that's for free, as well as apps on online stores for scanning and reading QR codes. Now, as I mentioned, a QR code is specifically designed in a manner that improves on the old linear version of the barcode. And here's just an example, a layout of how it works. Firstly, you'll have your position markers, which is these squares usually in the corner, and they are just there so the scanner can recognize that this is a QR code and the directional layout. Secondly, we'll have an alignment marker. What this does is it straightens out the QR code if it was on a curved surface. We've all had that time where you trying to buy something and because it's on a curved surface, the barcode doesn't work. And as such, they'll then go and they'll have to read out the number. With the alignment marker, this actually corrects this on a QR code. So even if it's curved, you can still read it. Then we have the timing pattern, which is this section. And this just shows the scanner how large the data matrix is. And then fourth is the version information. There's been quite a few versions of QR codes that's been improved on. And this just tells the scanner exactly which version you're using. Then the next two sections, like I've mentioned before, a QR code has a data error correction section, which means that 30% of a QR code can actually be corrupted and still readable. Now, these last two sections actually handle those. First, it's the format information. This gives the scanner the error tolerance sections as well as data mask patterns. And then this big section, number 6, is actually where all your data is stored. This is the data and error correction section. Between the data, there's actually open spaces which are called correction areas. And what these two does is that if part of the QR code is damaged, then not all the data is corrupted through this because there's open spaces and duplicate data in this. And then lastly, it's just the border, which actually just helps the QR code to be distinguished from its surroundings. So you can put a QR code on any picture, on anything, and it'll always be readable because the scanner knows exactly which section is just a QR code. Now, why use a QR code instead of a barcode? Barcode's been here for ages. Mostly because the QR code is an improvement on your linear barcode. The QR code, as stated, has a lot more data that it can store, and the type of data is also improved. A QR code can store up to 3 KBs of data. On an offline QR code, you can put up a full A4 page of data, while your linear barcode only handles up to 25 characters. Then a QR code can store 4 types of data, which means it can take numerical, alphabetic, and special characters, while your linear barcode only does numerical sequences because that is the information codes that it uses. Now, a QR code can actually store and use URLs for online links, while a barcode cannot. A QR code is independent of a database requirement, so you can put any information on it and it can be linked to any online website, while a normal barcode actually needs a specific database of which it is connected because that's where its data is stored. And then both can be read now with the new technology, free online with apps and that, but a lot of the older barcodes actually still requires a special scanner because unlike with the QR code, a barcode can only be read in one format. So where a QR code can be read through any app on most mobile devices. Barcodes, as stated before, needs a specific database that it works through. And that means that it needs online access always to it. While with a QR code, you can actually do offline data where you need no access to the internet at all, and all the information you require is stored on the QR code itself. Now, uses for the QR code is as much as you can think of and as wide as it can be. As I stated before, it is a data entry point, and that means it can be used as an online data access. It can be used for links to websites, to online databases, to forms. It can store in itself object information, site information. It can be used for public engagement, inquiries, and it can just be used as an offline data access. Now, another nice thing about a QR code is that it can be used on print format as well as digital format. That means that anybody now can actually take your cell phone and scan this QR code in front of me, and it should take you directly to the site as it's linked with. There's no issue with pixelation or that because the QR code has errors for that. Now, here's a few examples of how it works. You can also try and scan these if you want to. First is online. When you get the app, some of the newer phones actually has a QR code scanner built in. You don't have to download it anymore, but with the older ones you do. You usually just take a photo or put your camera close to the QR code. It instantly scans it, and then it will tell you that this is a website link, which you can then go onto. And then this one specifically will take you to SAHRIS, our main database. Any cell phone or Apple iPhone can be used for this. As I stated, it's actually integrated in some of the more newer versions. And then we have the offline one. Now, this one is actually where the QR code stands out a lot, because a lot of places don't have access to Wi-Fi or online data constantly. And with this QR code, the data is actually incorporated into the code itself. As you can see, it looks a lot more chaotic than the previous one, but that's because it's holding a lot more data. Now, again, you'll scan it, and then it will give you a bunch of info. This one's just a test, so I don't think there's anything. The one problem with this is that it is limited to the amount of information. So the most I've been able to put on a QR code is one full A4 page, but it's still a lot if you think about it for something that's so small, because it's a bit bigger than 2 post stamps together. Now, here's a few examples of where QR codes have actually been incorporated and used internationally and locally in our heritage sectors. First, the Museu Valencia de la Festa in Spain used QR codes during COVID to give the public access to a virtual tour through all their sites and monuments. Then the Royal Palace in Naples and the Willono Palace in Warsaw used QR codes on their websites to link each other, as they had information on both sides and they were doing an online exhibit of objects from both. It also gave more information on some of the objects. The Smithsonian has actually been using QR coding a lot in the exhibits, but the new one they did was it gave the public passes to the zoo by just scanning a QR code. Then locally, Iziko museums actually incorporated QR codes into some of their exhibits. The SAHRA is one that it's quite prominent. And this takes you to links of extra information if you want to. And then, as far as I know, they've also been the first and only museum in South Africa that's been using QR codes in their collection management section. Now, this is done on the storage of objects so that a person would be able to scan a box and know instantly what's inside, site information handling, and such. The Bristol Museum used QR codes as audio guides for visitors to listen to through their cell phone as they walk. The Whitney Museum of American Art gave a mobile museum guide to their users, also through a QR code that you could scan when you go in. The Van Eyck Museum in the Netherlands used the QR code to give the person's a different perspective of each collection so that you can see how they represent the collection. And then when you scan a code, it will show you a different form of how it can be shown to the public or extra information. And then finally, the British Museum used QR codes as an online form to get visitor feedback from people to see what they thought. And this was all on a database that you could quickly put in, and they'll get real-time information of what people are thinking of some of the exhibits. Now, in closing, just saying again what I did previously, a QR code is an information storage and access point. It is free to download. It's extremely easy. You don't need technical know-how or an IT department to use it. Google Play Store and Apple actually has programs for both the creation and the scanning of them. There is many online programs that's actually being designed for museums in QR coding, where you can add forms, databases, website links, everything's there. And in the end, the range of possibility in using a QR code is only restricted about what you think you can do. As we've seen, there are many different ways that museums and heritage sites have used QR codes, and there's many more that still can be done. And the technology is actually growing. So QR coding is actually being used a lot more, especially in the Asian market, but we are slowly gaining speed on what it can do and how far we'll go with it. So I just want to say thank you for listening, and that's my talk.
Thank you, Gertie. I'm pretty sure you are as fascinated by this information as I was. Pretty much used QR codes for getting access to menus during COVID. To hear that it has so much more to offer, especially the heritage sector, is really exciting. Thank you, Gertie. Our second guest today is Jenna Lavin from Open Heritage, who is also a familiar face to us. She used to work in our organization as well. And her presentation is called Opening Access to Heritage Through the Digital Innovation. Welcome, Jenna.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm going to share my screen. Thank you very much for having me and inviting me to talk. Clinton asked me to talk today about the work we have been doing with an organization I'm part of called Open Heritage. And I'm hoping to tell you a bit more about what we do and what we aim to do and some of the projects we've been working on. So Open Heritage is a registered nonprofit organization, and our goal is to assist in increasing access to heritage information through digital innovation. So what does that mean? Is we use innovative digital solutions to increase access to heritage information. Oh, I just lost power. I'm going to stop sharing and then reshare. I'm so sorry about this. Sorry about this load sheddings, just decided to mess with what I was busy with. So please excuse me while I fix this. Okay, there we go. That's better. There we go. So we use free open source software, Linux, QGIS, which is all software that's available for free without proprietary licensing. And we use it to document and digitize heritage data. Ethically, we believe everyone should have access to heritage information, just like everyone should have physical access to their heritage resources. And open data facilitates this freedom of information by providing a way where people can learn and engage with heritage knowledge. We collaborate with governments and we work on creating national heritage management systems or museum data collection management systems that act as integrated platforms for heritage workers, researchers, and the public. So as I said, we use free and open source software. Some of the free open source software we use is Drupal. We use QGIS, which is a GIS desktop software that has as much functionality as ArcGIS, which you can pay a lot of money for, but QGIS is free and very useful. We use GeoServer, which I spoke about earlier in his presentation about SAHRIS, and that allows us to customize maps and upload them and stream them quite efficiently. And we use ODK and Kobo forms for mobile-friendly data collection that speaks directly to these open source software systems that we build. So these are some of our partners and some of the platforms that we use. As I said, QGIS, ODK, Drupal. We use Creative Commons licensing as SAHRIS does for the data management. And we are Spectrum compliant. So we're one of the only service providers on the African continent that is Spectrum compliant. Spectrum is the international data standard for heritage data. And our systems that we build are Spectrum compliant, which is quite a useful sort of feather in our cap. So what is our long-term model? So as I said, we're a registered nonprofit with a number of members of our board that guide and direct in terms of the projects that we take on. And the goal is to provide software as sort of data management systems using free open source software that doesn't require licensing. So as I said, we're a Spectrum partner with the Collections Trust in the UK. And so all the systems we design are compliant with international standards. When we engage with a project, because we're a registered nonprofit, our goal is to provide appropriate tools to organizations that are fit for purpose, so they're customizable, but as reduced cost as possible. And so we don't require licensing for the software platforms we provide. We use free open source software. And so our partners are only charged for the time required for Open Heritage members to customize and install the software and provide training. All these steps can also be done by the partners themselves if they have the capacity to do so. But because we don't require licensing and because we limit our involvement in terms of customization and implementation, we're able to greatly reduce costs associated with getting organizations like museums and heritage authorities and their data digitized in systems that are useful and usable. The ultimate goal behind this from Open Heritage's perspective is to create a number of different systems that are able to integrate and interoperate with each other so that in the future we can have a system similar to Europeana, which is the international European database on heritage for Europe. And the goal behind what we hope to achieve is to create an Afrikaner system that aggregates heritage data throughout the African continent for research and for public use. The primary goal is to allow most of the funding allocated to heritage institutions, which we've heard time and time again, have very limited capacity and very limited funding. And we want to allow most of that funding to be allocated primarily to the work of digitization, as opposed to, in most instances, where that funding is allocated to licensing agreements and proprietary software. Yes, Nancy. Yes. Nancy?
So your slides are frozen.
Has it moved?
No.
Is that better?
No, it's still on the first one. There we go.
Okay, I'm sorry about that, everyone. Load shedding is being particularly difficult today. I'm going to move on to where we're at with a number of the projects that we have been working on. So in South Africa, we've been working through Open Heritage with SAHRIS. And SAHRIS, as we've seen today, is going from strength to strength with a very strong team of heritage professionals backing the system, who have an innovative vision for the sustainability of the project. You know, integrating with QR codes, etc., is really cool to see the project growing. How Open Heritage works with SAHRIS at present is we have an ongoing project of extracting heritage data, like sites information, from all the heritage grey literature that's on SAHRIS, and we extract those sites into SAHRIS. So we have a person who assists us with that, and she goes through heritage reports that are lodged on SAHRIS and extracts the site information and records them as sites on SAHRIS. And so we continually add to the data and the quality of data that's located within the database. We have worked on projects in Namibia and Kenya, developing national heritage management systems through Open Heritage. So Namibia, we finished implementing that project in 2015, and in Kenya, we completed the development of that project in 2018. And in both instances, the systems have been implemented, but they struggle with follow through in terms of sort of sufficient implementation and changes in workflow to use the system properly. So they've been struggling to upload and digitize their site object and heritage management data to these platforms that have been provided. We have submitted funding applications to create similar platforms in Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Somalia, Ethiopia, and Lesotho. In fact, for the new Lesotho National Museum, we developed their collections management system, but for various reasons, none of these funding applications have been successful, and for Lesotho, we've not yet been able to implement that system successfully. But we are hoping in the future that with amendments to heritage legislation that are more in line with our National Heritage Resources Act, which requires a development of databases for heritage management, that increased capacity and funding will become available as a result of legislative amendments. And so we're excited about the future for some of these countries. We don't only do big sort of national scale projects at Open Heritage, we also have completed other projects at a smaller scale, including a project involving the inventory of Xhosa vernacular architecture throughout the Eastern Cape, as well as Wikipedia content training, and I'll talk briefly about both of those projects shortly. What I want to talk about first is the project we did for the National Museum in Kenya. And this project was, it started in 2014 by Dr. David Wright, who for one of the projects he worked on did a trial system and he then worked with us to expand his trial. So the project was originally called Digital Kitambo. Kitambo is a Swahili word that sort of pertains to the past. We very originally called our part of the project SAHRIS for Kenyan Heritage Resources Information System. And essentially what we did through the SAHRIS project was create an integrated collections management system for the whole of the National Museum of Kenya, covering accessions and object movement. It was a national repository and inventory for all heritage sites and objects. And as is SAHRIS, we also developed a heritage management system covering permits, declarations, and archiving of survey reports that complies, the process flow for which complies with the heritage legislation for Kenya. The primary goal behind this project with the National Museum of Kenya was to create a database platform that would facilitate the dissemination of heritage information to the public. So the primary driver behind the funding we got for this project was in order to disseminate heritage information and increase access to heritage information by the general public. So for those of you who don't know much about the National Museums of Kenya, it hosts one of the longest and richest records of cultural and natural biodiversity. It's got 9.6 million objects in its accession register. Its archives go back to its origins when the museum was established in 1910 by Louis Leakey, and include virtually every archaeological and paleontological object collected in the country. As I said previously, Dr. David Wright completed a pilot project in 2014 to test the idea of how easy it might be to digitize the data housed in the archaeological collections of the National Museum of Kenya. And he found that that was quite successful. And so we went about writing funding proposals to scale up. Our funding proposal was accepted in partnership with a company called Digital Data Divide, who are based in Kenya. And through Digital Data Divide, or DDD, we got funding to digitize the collections in the archaeology and paleontology sections of the museum, starting with 10,000 artifact specimens and records to go into the database. So as with most museums, the data that was in the National Museum was very old school. The collections are housed in these sort of corridors of artifact boxes, and each artifact box has a number on it. So each sort of passage of shelves is labeled, and then each box in each passage is labeled, and those labels then link to a filing system which has a site record sheet which records more or less where the collection is from, who collected it, and any notes on that collection. And in a similar way to the way we developed, the way that SAHRIS was developed, once you have that data and how it's linked together, it's relatively simple to create a workflow that makes sense in a digital space. And so we went about selecting 10,000 artifacts, and we created, through the work of Digital Divide Data, who did all the intensive scanning and data extraction, we implemented and included all this sort of extracted data into SAHRIS, the data management system that was developed for the National Museum. As I said before, the primary goal behind getting the funding to do that sort of first phase of 10,000 artifacts was public outreach. The National Museum of Kenya, especially in Nairobi, has a huge public outreach program, and they reach sort of hundreds of thousands of school children every month. And so one of the main things that we wanted to do with the system is create a database from which information could be pulled into a website that is then easily navigated by teachers and by pupils to access the information. And so quite a lot of work was done by Dr. Christina Wright in trying to figure out what information would be useful for scholars and teachers and making that information accessible. So a website was then built in order to disseminate this information. And unfortunately, since the project ended in 2017, this website hasn't been maintained and it's no longer available to the public. So as I said earlier, one of the big challenges behind this, especially the Kenyan implementation, is actually changing workflows within the organization to make the system useful and usable by users within the museum system. Moving on to another project we worked on. So in 2016, 2017, Open Heritage applied for Lotto funding to do a project whereby we wanted to record, we worked with an architect to record vernacular architecture across South Africa. We didn't get all the funding we asked for from Lotto, so we had to reduce our project. And so we decided to focus on the Eastern Cape and record and digitize vernacular architecture throughout the Eastern Cape associated with isiXhosa people. Two practitioners were on the road for 14 days. They covered almost 4,000 kilometers. They conducted 142 interviews, took over 2,500 pictures, and recorded 142 structures. For those of you that aren't familiar, vernacular architecture is really grassroots building. So the construction of structures without sort of professional architectural guidance or intervention. And so it's really grassroots architecture. And what we were able to do with all the information we recorded is we managed to put together an ebook that we have circulated and is available online. I'm also happy to share it after this if anyone wants it. And we were able to add the 142 structures we recorded as a database to SAHRIS. You can see some of the images that were taken. Some of the data we collected is sort of obviously where the structures are located, what their use is. You can see the route that was followed by our team members. And this data, you know, while maybe it's not groundbreaking, it's data that didn't exist before. So it's one of the projects that we're quite proud of. We recorded a lot of really interesting principles that were in use, green building principles, natural drainage, thermodynamics, pest control, and we've detailed all of this in the ebook that's freely available to anyone who wants it. We have shared the ebook with the Eastern Cape Department of Education in the hopes that they could share it with their teachers. Another project that we worked on, which was very interesting, we worked with the Africa Center and Wiki Africa to assist to train young people who are interested in how to write content on Wikipedia. And the goal behind this project and how it aligns with the goals behind Open Heritage is that, as I pointed out at the start of my presentation, really the goal behind Open Heritage is to try and improve access to heritage information through digital innovation. And Wikipedia is sort of the biggest free online encyclopedia in the world. But the African continent is the least covered and least supported in terms of content on Wikipedia. There's much less information, much less accurate information about the African content, cultures, histories, ideas, and languages on Wikipedia than any other continent, any other place in the world. And Africa also has the fewest contributors per capita of any territory in the world. And so this project with Africa Center and Wiki Africa was trying to intervene in this and to try and rebalance the critical lack of information about all aspects of Africa on Wikipedia. And we wanted to train young people to be interested and inspired to share their knowledge of the places that they live through this amazing platform. So Open Heritage, in conjunction with Wiki Africa and the Africa Center, developed and implemented a training program with young people to create new and accurate content on Wikipedia that was relevant to South Africa, that was not on Wikipedia or available on Wikipedia before. That was a very fun project, and that came to an end in 2019. So in terms of what we hope to achieve moving forward, we want to continue to work with Kenya's stakeholders to free up digitization and data import capacity to provide momentum to the National Museum of Nairobi and National Museum of Kenya team to actually start utilizing the SAHRIS system. We aim to apply for funding for a sort of stronger resourced country, Nigeria or Egypt, to create a similar database or content management system for heritage resources in other African countries. We aim to combine a block of countries for a joint proposal in an endeavor to try and start momentum behind the Africana idea that we're working towards. And then ultimately what we aim to do and continue to do is look for projects, small projects, medium projects, and large projects to continue to promote and participate in the democratization of heritage through digitization projects and increasing access to heritage information through innovative digital and digitization work. Oh, and now I've stopped. What? Oh, and that is me. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk.
Wow, Jenna, thank you so much for that. It was incredibly interesting, and if we didn't have such a short time frame to be in, I myself would have loved to have picked your mind on all those exciting projects you worked on, especially the vernacular one. I found really fascinating. Thank you for your time, Jenna. We really appreciate it. Before we're coming to the end of our session, but I would like to give people an opportunity, if there is anybody that has questions, you are welcome to put up your hand, and we'll see if we can address those questions as they come. So feel free to either type something in the chat box.
They said there's no sound. They said there's no sound.
No sound.
No sound.
Can anybody hear me now?
I just heard you. Yes, Nancy, you are audible.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, just so that I can recap in case what I said was lost. Thank you very much, Jenna, for your time. The projects your organization or company is working on are tremendously exciting, but also very important, reaching out to other countries in Africa and communities. So once again, thanks so much for taking the time to do this presentation for us. Could I just ask if there are any questions so we can take a few minutes to respond? I know there is one question that came up earlier from Harriet, if I can get back there. Clinton, would you like to respond?
Yes, great. Thank you very much. Also, thank you very much to Harriet, who posed the question earlier in regards to heritage registers. So it's also a very important question. One in my presentation and in a lot of the presentations we do as SAHRA, we tend to wax lyrical about provincial heritage sites and national heritage sites and inventories of your provincially declared resources. The heritage registers is possibly one of the most important aspects of heritage data in the country. So for those that don't know, your heritage register is a formal protection assigned to resources which are significant at a local level, so at a municipal level, administered by your local authority. So I didn't speak a lot about those, but that is something that while the City of Cape Town, who Harriet works for, has done an absolutely fantastic job at putting together citywide inventory. I mean, really a sterling job there. There have been a few other inventories done, such as the one in Stellenbosch. I know Drakenstein has done a little bit of work there, as well as the city of Johannesburg. But these are quite isolated kind of pockets where this type of work has occurred. And if we want to build information on heritage resources about the country, the formalization of heritage registers is possibly the most important way of doing it, and being able to protect those resources. And really that comes to capacitating municipalities to take ownership of heritage within their kind of area of remit, so that they can manage heritage at the local level, who are as close to the communities it's intended to serve as possible. Thank you.
I'm just looking to see if there are any other hands. Anybody else? Jenna. Sure, Jenna, you can go ahead.
Thanks, Nancy. This one's for Clinton. So Clinton, you spoke about how the APM unit and the NIU are working with the DFFE to integrate the data from SAHRIS in their national screening tool for the environment. At the moment, that screening tool is very inaccurate based on the information we've been able to, the opportunities we've had to engage with that national screening tool. And with the recent proposed regulations to exempt PV installations and grid connections from the impact assessment process in areas of moderate to low sensitivity on the screening tool, was just wondering how close SAHRA is to improving the quality of information in that national screening tool. It will just, I mean, for us who work in the sector, it will greatly reassure us to know that the quality of that data is improving based on the information we know we have in SAHRIS.
Thank you very much, Jenna. So that is a very good question. So the information within the screening tool that they currently have did come from the baseline that is on SAHRIS at the moment. We do actually have to give them an updated version, which needs to be done soon. Because within the inventory unit, we actually have been working quite a bit in the rectification of information, particularly that which went onto SAHRIS from the older databases, things like your provincial heritage sites. Older databases weren't spatially enabled, so some of that information wasn't great, but we've been working hard to rectify that. So that will be provided to them in order to address a lot of those. But in terms of other things with the protocols and that, unfortunately, I can't answer that because I haven't been working within that protocol section. So that's, I think, a question that would need to be addressed by down the line with some of the other departments that are working more closely in that respect. So.
Thank you, Clinton. I see Harriet has left a comment as well. I don't know if one of our members would like to respond to it, or is it just for notification? Just notification? Okay.
No
Thanks for that, Harriet. Right, I don't see any more hands. Anybody? No? Okay. Well, then on that note, before we say goodbye, that's going to be done by my colleague Ethan Coty. And I just say thank you for the opportunity that we've had, and I hand over to my colleague.
Thank you, Nancy. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ethan Coty. I'm the Inventory and Research Coordinator for the National Inventory Unit. That brings our session to a close. We hope you had we hope you enjoyed it, gained some insight, and hopefully learned something new. I know I did. Those talks were amazing. We had some amazing talks today. I'd like to thank everybody for their time and effort that they put into their presentations, and the audience for taking the time to present, time to be present and to engage in the discussion. I would like to thank the wonderful National Inventory Unit, our unit manager Clinton, my colleagues Nancy and Gertie, and as well as our knowledgeable presenters, Nicholas Wiltshire from Cedar Tower Services and Jenna Lavin from Open Heritage for the presentations today. The Heritage webinar series continues until Thursday with lots of interesting talks, and I hope you guys attend those sessions as well. We'd like to thank the stakeholders for engaging with us and contributing to SAHRIS. Thank you so much once again for those that have joined us for the webinar, and to the wonderful panel of presenters that you see here today, and Nick and Jenna. We hope to see you next year, and thank you and goodbye.
Hi, Nancy.
Yes.
Before we conclude, I'd just like to ask everyone to switch their microphones on. So if you are a guest in the audience, please turn your microphone on. We'll just give them a second. Everyone that's online, please